So, as I say, we're all fellow primates, and I greet all of you as fellow primates with a call that you hear if you go to Gamba Island or one of the places in Uganda where there are still wild chimpanzees. Come on. Well, not a very good reply, but it'll do. Because I want to go back to the beginning. How did a little girl born to a poor family in England, as it was then, we didn't have a United Kingdom, come to be traveling around the world as I am? It's a very strange story for me. And I was born loving animals. I was just born that way. I don't know what sparked my interest. It just came with me into the world. And I was lucky in having a really supportive mother. And she helped me find books about animals. When I was growing up, I was born 90 years ago, there was no television. It hadn't been invented. So I learned about animals through books and being out in nature. As I say, we didn't have much money, but my grandmother had a lovely house. And when war broke out, we went to live there, me, my sister, my mother. And I spent hours and hours in the garden. I climbed the trees. I felt close to the birds. And learning, watching, almost every photograph you see of me when I was young, I'm with some kind of animal. When I was 4 years old, Mum took me to a farm in the country, a proper farm where animals graze in the fields, not one of these terrible factory farms. And I was given a job of collecting the hens' eggs. So, you know, there were about 6 little hen houses where they slept at night with nest boxes around the edge. And I would go with my little basket and put the eggs in it. But apparently, I began asking everybody, where is the hole on the hen for the egg to come out? Because I couldn't see such a hole, and nobody told me. So what I remember vividly is this hen. She was going into one of the hen houses, and I thought, she's going to lay an egg, and crawled after her. Big mistake. Squawks of fear, she flew out. So in that little 4-year-old mind, I must have thought, well, now the hens think this is a dangerous place. They won't come in here. But I'm on the path of discovery. I'm going to find out where the egg comes out of the hen. So I went into an empty hen house, and apparently I was gone for over 4 hours. And it was getting late, and nobody knew where I was. And my mother had actually called the police when this excited little girl came rushing towards the house, all covered in straw. And I had actually seen a hen lay an egg. And I don't know who was more excited, me or the hen. So anyway, that was my first exploration into the world of animal behavior. And I tell that story because that was the making of a little scientist. Curiosity, asking questions, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there, and a different kind of mother might have crushed that early fascination, that early beginnings of a scientific career. And I might not be here now. So I was good at school, but there was no money for university. I had to get a job. I did a boring old secretarial training. I had a job in London. And then came the opportunity. My mother had advised me to always follow every opportunity that came. Because when I first said at 10 years old, I'm going to go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them, everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? You don't have money. Africa's far away, and you're just a girl. It was my mother who said, just remember that if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity, and if you don't give up, hopefully you find a way. And that's a message I take around the world, especially to people in disadvantaged communities. And I can't tell you how many have said, Jane, I want to thank you, because you taught me, because you did it, I can do it too. And I wish Mum was alive to know how her message to me has changed many lives. Anyway, yes. I'm sure she's listening up there somewhere, so thank you, Mum. So I was working in London, boring old job, and I get a letter from a school friend whose parents had moved to Kenya, inviting me for a holiday opportunity. Had to get the money, went home, worked as a waitress for about 5 months, and eventually had enough money to go to Africa. Return fare I had to have. We didn't go by plane in those days. There were some flying, but they were terribly expensive. Went by boat. And, of course, from London to go to Mombasa in Kenya, you should go through the Suez Canal. It takes about, I don't know, just nearly 2 weeks. But the Suez Canal was closed because Britain and Egypt had some kind of silly little war. So our boat went all the way around down to South Africa and up. And the first place I set foot on African soil was Cape Town. And it was really exciting. There was the iconic Table Mountain, and there were Africans dressed in their national costume. But then I began to notice on the doors into the hotels, all over the place, there were these words in Afrikaans, slechts blanc. And I said, what do these words mean? White people only. I didn't grow up like that. My grandfather was a congregational minister. We didn't judge people by the color of their skin, but as human beings. And I couldn't wait to leave South Africa then. It was 2 days the ship was in dock. And when I got to Kenya, it was better. It was just on the very eve of independence from British colonial rule. So the atmosphere was totally different. And I stayed with my friend, and then I heard about a man called Dr. Louis Leakey, famous paleontologist, anthropologist. And somebody said, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should go and see Louis Leakey. So I went to see him at the Corindon Museum. It's now the National Museum of Kenya. And he must have seen something in me. He took me around, he asked me all sorts of questions. And because I'd read everything I possibly could about animals in Africa, and there wasn't much back then, and because I'd spent hours in the Natural History Museum in London, I could answer most of his questions. Anyway, he gave me a job as his secretary. His secretary had left just 2 weeks before I met him. That was obviously meant to be. And so now I'm in a world where everybody around me can answer my questions about the animals and the plants of East Africa. And he actually took me on one of his annual 3-month digs to Olduvai Gorge. It was before any early human had been found there. And all the animals were there. And I loved that every one of the big 5 I first met on foot. A lion in Olduvai that followed for about, I don't know, twice the length of this room. I think he was a young male, he was curious. And another time, it was a rhino. Rhino was as far away as the end of that room. Knew there was something there. It was me and the other young girl, Gillian. And he went back and forth with his tail up, making little pff sounds. And then luckily he ran off in the other direction. So this was exciting. And I think it was because of how I reacted to these 2 meetings. Louis said I behaved exactly right. That he asked me one day if I would be prepared to go and study a group of chimps, to be the first person to find out about their behavior in the wild. Wow. Of course. Yes, yes, yes. Well, first he had to get money. That took about a year because, I hadn't been to college. I was just out from England. And for that year, I went back home and continued to learn everything I could. And then Tanganyika back then, was still part of the British Protectorate. And the authorities said, a young girl on her own in the forest, unheard of. No, she can't come. In the end, they gave in and said, but she can't come alone. So who volunteered to come with me? For the first 4 months of my 6 months money allowance, it It was my mother, that same amazing mother. And it was my mother who gave me this moral boost. Jane, you found that peak, and from there you're learning about the different calls the chimpanzees make. You're learning how they bend branches over to make nests at night. You see how they move around, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups, sometimes a mother with just her children, and occasionally many groups joining together when a different food becomes available with lots of noise and excitement. You're learning more than you think. So it was really sad that it was just 2 weeks after she had to leave. And I began to learn more and more about the chimpanzees, how each one is as different from each other as we are from each other. I learned about their communication. It's the same as ours. Kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, begging for food with hand outstretched. Males competing for dominance, swaggering, looking as dangerous as they possibly can, shaking their fists. Remind you of a few male politicians today? So